So let me talk about the first thing is about the cow. Number one is the cow, and the kind of cow that you pick is important. That's not a consideration in America because the cows that we get are typically cows that are optimized for meat production. They usually have a lot of marbling. So in America, it's very common. The most common one you hear is things like the Angus cow. You have something like the Holsteins. You have a lot of kind of dairy cows. You have the Brahman Angus and a whole bunch of other cows. So what is important about cow is the breed, and cows in the world. I'm not a cow expert, so don't get me wrong. I'm not an agricultural expert, but I'll tell you what I learned from the agricultural experts is cows are divided into kind of two categories. You have the warm weather cows, and you have the cold weather cows. So if you think cows like in Africa, if you remember looking at pictures from Africa, the cows have a hump. So the hump on the cow is a characteristic sign that it's a warm weather cow. So if you go down to South America, you go to Africa, the cows that have the hump right along the back of the back here are known as the zebu species. The zebus are cows that are bred for hot environments, and they can thrive when it's very, very hot. American cows will die in South America, desert and hot regions, and in Africa because our cows are more what we call the Angus and the Hereford type of breed. So the Hereford breeds came from England and Europe, and they were brought to America. So in American cows like Angus and Holsteins and all, they are more of the non-hump cows. So I'm just going to divide cows into two piles, hump and non-hump. Hump is hot climates. No hump is cool climates. So when you buy a cow, depending on where you're watching my video, and you live in a warm weather country, you might end up with a cow that has the hump, like the zebu, the Brahmans, and those cows behave and taste completely differently than your American style, cold weather, European type of cows. So that's the first step. So understanding the kind of cow that you are going to buy from is important. Now I compete around the world. So when I go around the world and I cook barbecue and contests, I always have to make sure that I understand where the cow is coming from because different cows have different marbling and other characteristics, which I'll get into. So that's the one on cow. So any questions before we move on cow? Okay, good. Let's move on to the second thing. I'm price conscious, so I always say the wrong price. The price of the cow or the beef is in proportion to the type of beef it is and the grade, right? So wrong price. So as you have probably heard me talk online for the past few weeks, we're having a very major problem in America today with cow prices. So the wholesale for briskets have gone up from about $2.60, $2.75, is shot up to $5, $6 the past 2-3 weeks. Now, I'm not a beef futures expert, but there is what people believe to be market manipulation going on. And the farmers are getting screwed, and you and me are getting screwed. The restaurants are getting screwed. And the people who are profiting right now apparently are the brokers and the people who do the futures for the beef. So they're buying it dirt cheap from the farmer, and then they're selling it to us at exorbitant prices. And they're saying that the price is caused by some kind of a shortage of supply, which I don't know is true. But again, the reason I raise that is the wrong price is because if you are cooking for catering and restaurant, that is a consideration. If you're cooking for your family, whoopee-doo. Whether you pay $2.80 a pound, you're paying $6 a pound, it doesn't really matter because the brisket will run you anywhere from say $50 to say $120. It's not going to break the bank. But if you're running a restaurant, it can be the death of your brisket, meat during the meal service. So that's a wrong price. So if you are a pitmaster, you always have to think about price. If you are a backyarder, not so much. Catering and restaurant, absolutely, you have to think about price. Number two. Number three is what we call the aging process. So you know that a cow is basically raised to about, say, 960 pounds. And then the cow is brought to a feedlot where they put it into a kind of a penned area. And they go from eating grass and they move over to eating grain. And in that feedlot, they start around 960. They kind of sit in the feedlot. They're fed a lot of grain and corn. And they are basically grain finished until they are approximately, I don't know, depending on the kind of producer, anywhere from, I heard 1450 to about maybe 1750 pounds, right? Now, once the cow is kind of dispatched and processed, right, the meat goes through a rigor mortis process. So the brisket is the pectoral muscle of the cow. There is the left brisket and there's the right brisket. There are actually two muscles, pectoralis major, pectoralis minor. One sits on top of the other, and there's a layer of fat between the two muscles. You cook the whole brisket, it's called a packer. You can also separate the point and cook the point separately. You can separate and cook the flat separately. So in my videos, I like to cook packers. I'm a packer kind of guy because I find that it cooks the best. And then that's what you'll find if you're doing restaurant and you're doing catering, they do that. Now, if you go to Costco, you can buy the flat. You guys have asked me a lot of times how to cook the flat. I have some videos on how to cook just the flat. The flat is a little bit more delicate, requires a little bit more finesse, but you guys can go watch that video and learn how to cook that. So the aging is important is because the longer the meat ages, right, the meat goes through different changes in its composition. Now, the key to understand aging is there's two kinds of aging. One is called dry aging. One is called wet aging. So wet aging you've seen in the cryovac. When you buy from the store, the meat is in this vacuum seal. The cryovac can be aged, and you can age it anywhere from, say, some people like to age 2 weeks, it's good. A month is good. If you really want to push the limit, you can go up to 2 months, about 60 days. You have a risk of the meat going bad when you age it because the meat was pristinely handled at the processing plant, properly vacuum sealed, and most importantly, no time, no temperature abuse. Then that meat will age nicely, provided your refrigerator is very, very stable and you are running 34 degrees rock solid all the time. This does not really happen in a home refrigerator because the home refrigerator has fluctuations if you monitor it. So if you're aging this in a home refrigerator, it doesn't work that well. But if you have a commercial refrigerator or really high quality refrigerator that has a flat line, temperature, consistency, then you can go ahead and age it in a cryovac for up to 60 days. Now, what cryovac aging does is basically it allows the meat to become more tender and soft. And I have videos out there if you want to watch about the kelpane, kelpastane, and how they work, desiccation, and so on. You can go watch my video on aging because it's a separate 1 hour TED talk just on aging alone. But I'll just kind of gloss over that. So brisket aging is important. If you age your brisket, they taste really good. So if you can even age 1 week in your refrigerator, it's all good. Just leave it in there in a cryovac and age the meat, it'll taste better. If you buy a high-end meat like Snake River Farms, you buy the Wagyu from Snake River Farms, they run you about probably $250, $300 with shipping to your home overnight. Those are already aged at the plant, so you don't really have to age those. They will taste great right out of the packaging. So that's aging number 3. Moving on to number 4 is the brisket fabrication, right? So the briskets come from the factory, kind of fabricated in different sizes and weights and so on. So how the brisket is fabricated is important because this may not be true, but most producers in America do it consistently. But if you buy the brisket overseas, for example, I have people who are on my channel from Germany, from England, from Australia, from Japan, the Middle East, Europe. The brisket fabrication is important because the standard by which the brisket is fabricated is governed by certain national standards. So in America, right, the very common standard is called the NAMP. So for those of you who can't sleep at night, go Google NAMP and read the manual from start to end. They go through the arcane specifications of all of the different kind of specs that you have to prepare your beef to meeting NAMP standards. So if you live in another country, you need to understand how they fabricate briskets in your country. Because when I went to cook the British National Championships, when I got the brisket, right, the brisket was rolled up in a roll and there was no more fat on the fat cap. And that's what they call brisket. So brisket by fabrication is a consideration if you are an international viewer and you're cooking in other parts of the world. Okay, so that's number 5. I'm gonna pause here. We are 1/4 of the way through. Anybody have any questions on what I talked about, the first 5 topics? Wrong cow, wrong price, wrong aging, wrong brisket fabrication. I'm sorry, the first 4. Okay, so any questions on the first 4?
How long are you supposed to age, Harry?
You can age for up to 60 days, depending on whether you're doing a wet aging or dry aging. Aging involves 3 parameters: enzymatic aging with the kelpane, kelpastane, desiccation, and then forming mold. So if you have a dry brisket that you are aging, dry aging, you can form mold. There's a couple of molds. Okay, cool. All right, so the third piece is the mold. So the mold formation on a dry aged brisket is also important. You have molds and fungi such as what do you call Saccharomyces cerevisiae or something. The white mold that you see on the Italian sausage, on the salumi in the Italian deli, that's the kind of mold that you want. You have Penicillus roqueforti that's on the brisket. So you can dry age the meat, but that is a kind of a separate TED talk on just the aging the meat. But suffice to say, you can age from 30 to 60 days and beyond if you know what you're doing. Aging has the possibility of spoiling the meat. So you can actually get yourself in trouble if you are doing it that way. If somebody asked me a question, let's see, continue unmute and ask me about best by date, right? So the best by date is basically what is on the packaging itself. When you want to dry age meat, right, you cannot just go to the store and buy the meat from Costco and take it home and dry age for 60 days. You need a kill date. The kill date of the animal is on the box. So you really have to have the actual box that the meat came in to see what the kill date was. The count for the aging days comes from the kill date. And when you age meat, you have to age it within a very specific temperature range of about 34 degrees Fahrenheit to about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And there's a whole science and art form behind what temperature, how long, how much airflow, dry aging, wet aging, kelp stain desiccation, and mold formation. So that's going to be a separate TED talk. If you guys want to talk about that, I'll cover that. Cryovac aging, okay to go past date. Yes, you can go past the best by date if you handle the meat without two things: time and temperature abuse. So from a food scientist standpoint, you really got to be mindful that these are the two biggest dangers to your product: time abuse, temperature abuse. Time abuse refers to the duration of time that it is in the danger zone. And what is the danger zone? The danger zone is about 140, 40-140 rule. So if the meat was in the danger zone of 40 degrees to 140, it's sitting there in the danger zone. That means that there is time and temperature abuse, because if it's sitting in that zone, the meat can go bad. So you cannot really age meat that is kind of already was not handled properly with the time and temperature. Now, let's move to number 5. Number 5 is wrong grade. In America, there's about maybe 8 grades of beef out there. The 3 that you're familiar with is prime, choice, and select. And beneath that, that's like commercial, canner, cookie cutter, and so on. So when you buy beef, when you cook brisket, some people tell me, Harry, if you are a good pitmaster, you should be able to cook select briskets. Okay, I'm not a good pitmaster. Okay, I don't get very good results cooking select grade briskets, unfortunately. So I just was at Tootsie yesterday, met that wonderful woman, Tootsie Tomanes. I met Carrie, the owner, and I met Clay, the pitmaster. Clay cooks the brisket. So I'm able to now live declaration tell you, Clay cooks select briskets. Okay, so that rumor about Snow's Barbecue being voted top best 50 places in Texas, I think they won first place twice in a year. They won first place twice in their 15-year career, which is phenomenal. He cooks select. All right, so I tasted Snow's brisket yesterday, absolutely fabulous. So he knows how to cook select. He did give me some tips, which I will feature in future videos on how to cook a select brisket well. They do something that's not so common in Texas. They use something called the Texas crutch. So for those of you watching my channel, you guys know what Texas crutch is. So you see me do more testing using the crutch method to get a better result out of lower quality brisket. So suffice to say that. All right, now buy the best grade you can afford. Buy grades prime when you can find it mostly, and then buy select when you really have no more choice. When you go to the store and there's no other brisket in there and you have to cook a brisket, you have select, then cook it. But my recommendation is go ahead and cook the higher grades of brisket. If you can afford and you want to splurge, some people like the flavor of things like the Wagyu. If you can want to splurge $250 on a brisket, knock yourself out, just enjoy it. It's number 5. Let me move on to number 6. So 6 has to do with size. So 6, 7, 8, and 9, which is size, symmetry, marbling, and striation, are very important. So these are the 3 things I'll talk together as one topic. Harry likes big briskets. he cannot lie. All right. So I find that big briskets seem to cook better. Some people like smaller briskets because it's more compact, it cooks faster. If you are a competitor like me, we like big briskets because I think a thick slice, a tall slice in the box seems to look better, in my opinion. Now, I'm a certified barbecue judge from KCBS, and when I judge a box, I'm not supposed to judge the box by the brisket size. But I can tell you that in general, when I compete, I want the biggest brisket that I can put in the box in terms of the slice because it just looks majestic, just looks absolutely, absolutely amazing. So for competition, I like big briskets, I cannot lie. Now, for all the other parts of this, like for catering and for backyard and for restaurant use, if you are out there watching this video, you don't really have to worry about the size because you need to optimize your cook based on the consistency of the size. So let's say you open up the case of brisket, there's 5 briskets in there, they're all kind of like 12 poundish, that's fine. For restaurant setting, knock yourself out. For competition setting, I don't like it. I want to get a brisket in competition between say 18 pounds, 15 to 18 is about ideal with a tall flat because I'm trimming away all the briskets on the side. I'm not using all the brisket, I'm just using the middle part where the tall slices will come from. So my consideration for competition is completely different in a restaurant. In restaurant, you're interested in yield. So in restaurants, right, the size, symmetry, striation, and marbling, you want to have good marbling. Marbling is the fat content looking across the cut. The striation is the fat content viewed the other way along the parallel rows of the microfibrils of the protein. Symmetry means that the brisket is a even shape. It's got a kind of nice oval shape. For those of you who ever watch Aaron Franklin's videos, he used Creekstone primes, Creekstone farm primes. So Creekstone has the distinction of producing really, really consistent Angus beef that is superbly marbled, has good symmetry. The fat cap is not too thick, not too thin, so that you don't lose a lot of fat. For those of you who watched the video that I did with Vinny, we trimmed 3 briskets up. Vinny trimmed her brisket, the Holsteins. The Holsteins were all fat. So fat, you're buying at $4.80 a pound to throw away. So the marbling and the striation and the symmetry is very important. The size is also very important. If you're a competitor, big is good. If you're not a competitor, you're a backyarder and you want to cook consistently, you just want to make sure that all the briskets you buy are the same size. That way, when you put it all in the pit, you know, if you're a commercial operator, you're loading your pit with 24 to 80 briskets at a time. If they're all kind of the same size, they all cook evenly. What you do in a restaurant setting is that you put all your small briskets together. So let's say you have all the 12 pounders in one pile, you put all the 12 pounders on. Then you have the 10 pounders which are small, you put the 10 pounders on. So that when you manage to cook and you do what we call the brisket shuffle in your pit, where you're shuffling the meat across your pit grate, you can kind of shuffle it in batches so that the meat will all come off ready for service at the approximate same time. Okay. All right. So that covers wrong grade, wrong size, wrong symmetry, and marbling and striation. I'll pause here for any questions. Okay,
Harry,
moving on.
Harry, I don't have a question, but and you know Shad Curtin, don't you?
No, who's Shad?
He's Boynton's Barbecue. He won second season Pitmasters, won $100,000.
Okay.
But he's out of Des Moines, Iowa, and I was at his restaurant talking to him one day, and he told me that he won the Jack Daniel's brisket with a choice.
Good for him. Good for him. Yes.
Yeah. He said he had a Wagyu as well, but the choice came out better.
Yeah.
And he said his secret, he said, was he aged at 30 days.
Yes. Yeah. And there's many ways to get to the top of the mountain. Again, right? Wagyu has a very smooth mouthfeel due to the oleic acid and the Delta 9 mutation. The Angus has just good eating characteristics. So I can probably eat an entire Angus myself, but there's no way that I can eat a whole Wagyu myself because the oiliness gets to you after the third bite. It's superb, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely delicious, but the eating pleasure from a unctuous, oily Wagyu with oleic acid is different than the eating pleasure from just a regular Angus. Just tastes like beef, just really, really good. Grass fed, grain finished Angus. It's actually superb. That's why folks like in Texas, probably a brisket shortage is because all the Texas restaurants are opening up. All the restaurants in Texas are ordering prime grade Angus. You just think about it, right? Aaron Franklin, my buddy, he goes to 110 a night. So every night, 110 cows, well, 55 cows are dead. So he's single-handedly, and all there's 5,000 barbecue restaurants in Texas. So everybody's cooking prime if they can find it. Not sure now, we are pushing $6 a pound. So when you go to your friendly barbecue joint and they don't have brisket in stock, please be kind to them because they just cannot afford to sell you the brisket. I think that the prices in Austin went up from $22 a pound of cooked brisket. They're pushing past $30 a pound now. And people are balking because the customers are complaining, why so much money? So, but they don't understand that the business is prone to the market fluctuations of the cost of meat. Okay. All right, let's move on. I'm going to number 9 now, wrong trim. So as I said, the brisket fabrication itself, depending on the type of country, the type of cow, the brisket is comprised of pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, the two muscles are sandwiched together. Sometimes the alignment of the top muscle and the bottom muscle, the moist and the lean or the fatty is not aligned. So when you buy a brisket, right, you have to look at the brisket because if the symmetry is not off, it doesn't mean it's a bad brisket. It still could be a bad brisket. You just have to make sure that you trim it right. So let me just walk through a couple of different trims. There's a backyard trim, there's a catering and restaurant trim, and there's a competition trim. You guys have seen my videos many times. I show you how I trim it competition style. It's very, very drastic because the purpose of a competition trim is to get about 8 to 9 perfect slices. You really don't care about the rest of the brisket because you're not going to serve it. You might give it away. You might just discard it or who knows. But you are only focused on getting about maybe 12 or 10 pieces of beautiful, perfect burnt end cubes. I like to cut my burnt end into cubes and serve it in a competition box. I like to cut about maybe 8 slices, perfect slices to go in the box for the flat part. The rest of the brisket, I really don't care. So to me, that's not the same as if you're cooking backyard, you really are interested in yield. You're cooking restaurant, you're interested in yield. So the trim of the brisket, right, because depending on the lay on the flat and the point muscle, you just need to know how to trim your way around the brisket. The competition trim can be done very drastically. Some people trim it to the width of the box. So you trim it to about 8.5, 9 inches. When you cook the brisket, you calculated that the brisket will shrink perfectly. And then that's just shrink the brisket will fit perfectly into your 9-inch styrofoam box. So that's a consideration for competition. Now, for restaurants, right, a lot of times the brisket has thin portions, and you've seen that in the video with Winnie. I showed you guys how Winnie and I trim it into a block trim, or you can call it a block trim or rectangular trim, where we trim the thin parts off. We trim the little triangle at the back end of the flat of the brisket. We trim it off so that you can create kind of like a little rectangular brisket, right? That you can cook so that it renders evenly and it ends up in a block. So for food service, you're slicing into individual slices so that it looks really good when you plate the brisket to the customer. And you want to make sure that you can block trim it so that you can cut it off in half, cut your point muscle 90 degrees against the grain, and cut your flat muscle 90 degrees grain. So you actually, when a brisket is set up this way, you cut it this way on the top and you cut it this way at the bottom. So you need to be able to do that with economies of scale. So when you trim the brisket in a restaurant setting, all the trimmings, right, are used to render the tallow. All the trimmings are used to make the sausage. So for backyard people, you guys have seen me do many times. I take all the trim and I make a crock pot, Instapot. I do a curry, I do a birria, I do a whole bunch of stuff with the leftover brisket trimmings. So that's how you maximize your yield, because every ounce of that expensive piece of meat should be utilized 100%, either as brisket or repurposed as something else, including tallow, sausage, hamburgers, brisket sushi, which you'll see an episode coming soon. All right, so that's the wrong trim. Next one, let's move on to now preparation. So now you trim the brisket, everything's ready to go. Let's move on to the brisket preparation. You have this thing called the wrong schmear. I've told you guys many times, when you smoke meats, my preference is not to have any oil on the meat because the oil clogs the pores. What's the backyard trim? Okay, from Tim Adam. So Tim, a question about the loss, right? So a normal brisket the yield is about 45%. So if you buy a brisket it's 10 pounds when you start, by the time you're done cooking, you only have about 4.5 pounds if you're lucky. And depending on the breed of animal, the producer, and the kind of packing house, the way they trim the brisket, I always tell people, if you're running a restaurant, calculate 45%. So you bought that brisket, right, at $6 a pound, that's $60 for a 10-pound brisket, right? You only have 4.5 pounds of meat at the end, barely. So that's why when you go to a restaurant, they have to charge you $30 a pound of cooked brisket because there's so much shrinkage, so much trim loss, so much cooking loss, so much fat rendered loss during the brisket journey. So 45% is what I recommend you use in your calculations at home or in a restaurant. That way it's conservative because there's a lot of bits of the briskets that you cannot use. I actually have a series of videos. I made about 10 videos on how to repurpose brisket. So if you're running a restaurant, you want to repurpose the brisket and you want to sell those repurposed briskets to make a profit, watch those series. I have a lot of recipes coming that in being edited right now. Okay, now let's talk about the schmear. Schmear is basically the kind of the tacky thing you put on your brisket to ensure that the rub sticks. There are many kinds of schmears. You can use things like water, apple juice, apple cider vinegar. You can use Worcestershire. You can use consomme, beef paste. You can use mayo and so on. My recommendation is this: whatever schmear you use is fine. I like something simple. Worcestershire, beef consomme, or beef broth works fine for me. Those are things I go to. Mustard is okay too. I would avoid anything that has oil. Why? Because when you put oil on your brisket, it covers the pores. So once you cover the pores, right, the smoke's not going to penetrate. So I prefer to use a schmear that doesn't include oil. Do you always have to schmear? The answer is no. I inject my briskets a lot. So when I inject my brisket's wet. There's no need to put a schmear because that tacky surface is enough for the rub to stick. All right, so that's schmear. Let's move to number 11, wrong rub. This is a 3-hour argument in Jerry Springer fist fight. Everybody's got their own idea of what rubs to use, right? Some people say, hey, real briskets is just S&P. That's great. Some people say, no, that's boring. Let's go SPG, salt, pepper, garlic. No, that is boring. Let's go SPG, a little bit of chili in it. People like me put tahini. So the sky's the limit, right? So knock yourself out in terms of the rub. But you need to understand that the rub is there to assist in something called the Maillard reaction, which is the non-enzymatic pyrolysis of amino acids on the surface of your meat. Okay, Rick's asking me, what do you inject with? Rick, go watch my video. I have a video of that I show shootouts of all the different commercial injections in the marketplace. I am a very process efficient and cost efficient cook. I'm lazy and cheap. So rather than make all the injections myself, which I've shown you on videos, how to make an injection from scratch, I buy a commercial injection. An injection essentially has 4 major components in it. Number 1, MSG. Number 2, phosphates, sodium phosphate, disodium ionocyanate, disodium guanylate. So go watch those videos. That's another hour TED Talk just on the injections alone. I tell you what are my favorites, how to mix them, how to buy them, how to make it from scratch. So Tim, go watch that video. So moving on the rub. So the rub story is that use whatever rub you want. Understand that the rub tastes different raw than tastes cooked. So you cannot buy a rub and open up the bottle and say, good rub. No, you don't know. You gotta cook it, and the rub tastes different on different kinds of meat. So always make sure that you test your rub cooked. Do not judge a rub raw. That's why a lot of people who buy my rub, right? They always say, Harry, your rub doesn't taste really anything special. It tastes like any other ordinary rub. But the magic happens after you use my rub, where you apply heat and you have that non-enzymatic browning of amino acid. We love your beef rub. I order 5 pounds a day. How long can I expect to last? Okay, my rub will last forever. You put it in the freezer, it'll last you 3 years. No problemo. The only thing about rubs is that rubs are prone to something called ultraviolet degradation. So if you put it in the sun, the ultraviolet rays of the sun will bleach out the chili and the peppers. So the peppers will become muted. But if you leave my rub in a cool pantry away from moisture, it'll last you minimum 1 year. And then if you've been good a couple of years later, if you want to store my rub for a long time, just throw it in the freezer like coffee powder. Just put it, it comes in a Ziploc bag, the big one, the 5 pounds. So just throw it in the freezer and just take something out when you need it. Going to Moolah and North only. Oh yeah, he's gonna use Moolah and North. Yeah, I mean, you saw Chris Guerin, he won the steak championship. He's now going to go to the world championship. All he used was my Moolah rub on his steak and a little bit of other ingredients. I told him to add MSG. So if you're using my Moolah for competition, I add MSG and I add more heat to it. So you can actually order the MSG and the hot version on my website. So I don't really advertise it, but a lot of competitors, they just call up my co-packer, Angela, in soupbase.com, and they just say, hey, I'm a competitor. Can you ship me 5 pounds of Harry's competition blend? And they just take the moolah and they add the MSG and they add more pepper and cayenne to make it spicy. So when I cook at home, that's what I like to cook. I am like Uncle Roger. I like MSG. So I'm okay. Uncle Roger will be happy. Yeah. If you guys know Uncle Roger, can you do me a favor? Can you ask Uncle Roger to do a throwdown with me? I want to do a fried rice throwdown with him. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Wrong rub. Okay, talk about that. Wrong injection. Okay, wrong injection is something very optional. If you're a competitor, I want to guess almost all of us inject. If you're a backyarder, don't worry about that. But you can actually put the wrong injection because people put in products that are too kind of funky, right? And when you do injections as a competitor, the key to injection is the staining. So if you are a competitor, staining is a potential problem. What staining means is that you use a very dark injection. So I'll give you an example. You put soy sauce into your injection, you will stain the brisket with black streaks. So that's not cool. So I'm not going to talk too much about it. It's another 20 minutes on injection, but suffice to say, injection is one of the things that do go wrong in a cook. If you're injecting for backyard, for home use, make sure that your injection doesn't cause the residual black streaks on your brisket after you slice it. If you're a competitor, that's a huge no-no. Now, for those of you who don't inject, just ignore me and move on. Okay, number 13, wrong pit. When you cook a brisket, right, I find that a lot of people don't realize that the pit matters when you cook a brisket, primarily because brisket barks up best when there's airflow. The other consideration you are not aware is that a brisket is a pretty big hunk of meat. So when the big hunk of meat is in your pit, it can block something called the convective airflow in your pit. The convective airflow is typically referred to as the draft. So when you go to Texas, right, you see a brick offset with a huge chimney stack and then a whole bunch of bricks and then a firebox on this end. You're burning the fire. It is the chimney that draws the air through the vacuum action based on the thermodynamic principle that the chimney is about usually 1/3 the length of the offset. So if you look at all the good offsets out there, whether they're metal offsets, you can notice that there is a significant proportional correlation between the length of the cooking chamber and the length of the smokestack. It's typically about 3-to-1 ratio. The bore, or the diameter of the smokestack is also very important, and that's another 3-hour argument in Jerry Springer fist fight, whether you use a 6-inch bore, you use the 8-inch, you use a 10-inch, and you use a 12-inch, and how you regulate the draft. Because it is actually the suction of the vacuum that causes the hot air to flow over your meat to bathe your brisket with a good airflow so that it dries out fast, but does not dry out too fast. So when you cook a brisket, the pit is very important. That's why a lot of pitmasters love the way an offset cooks on briskets. Like, I'm in Texas right now. All of the top barbecue restaurants here exclusively all use offset cookers. There is a reason for that, because in a metal offset, the draw is absolutely perfect. So you hear people like Mill Scale, things like Mobergs here, things like David Close being used. These are all the people who have perfected the technique of building an offset. So you guys saw Winnie's offset. So Winnie's offset is made by Sean Gonzalez out in Rialto, California. He built the offset for Winnie. The design is very similar to a standard pit called a mill scale. So in Texas, everybody buys mill scale. They make really, really good pits. And because of the design of the pit, the airflow is perfect. So when you cook brisket and you want superb results, a lot of people like to use a offset pit, particularly a metal offset. There's another offset called a brick offset. When you see a brick offset, where instead of the metal cooking chamber, it's a bunch of brick. It's a brick rectangular housing with a firebox on one end and a chimney stack on the other. So if you go to Smitty's and Krauts in Lockhart, you see those kinds of brick offsets. Those are also wonderful to cook, but those are permanent fixtures that you have to kind of build in your backyard. In terms of the pit, can you get a result if you don't have an offset? The answer is yes. That's why on my channel, you see me use a Weber kettle. I use a drum. I use a Weber Smokey Mountain. I use the smoke fire. I use the GMG. I use the pit and spits. I use the silverback griller. I even, cook it on a gas grill. So the idea is that if you understand how to control thermodynamics, you can create a good pit, even if you have a modest budget and a lack of space. For example, I live in California. I live in a postage size stamp of a house. So I don't have 5 acres where I can buy every pit I want and have 50 pits in my backyard, even though I would love to do that. So I make do. You see me get really, really good results even on something like a smoke fire. Is it perfect? The answer is no. There is no such thing as a perfect pit. And you can quote me on that. Even if you use an offset, the offset has certain sweet spots. You need to know how to burn wood, and you need to know how to set up the pit properly to work. So Harry always has told you, and I will stick to it, it is always the pitmaster, never the pit, never the meat. Remember that. Okay. All right. Next time, let's talk about almost at the end. The other one is called the wrong position in the pit. Now, what is this? Why is this important? When you cook brisket, I told you that the big lump of meat, like maybe 12 pounds trim, how you put it in the pit affects the airflow. So on an offset, right, the firebox is sending air from one end to the pit to the smokestack on the other end. So the air flows over the meat. That's why on most offsets, they like to cook the meat kind of fat up so that the hot air flows over the top of the brisket, which is hotter to render the fat, and a little bit cooler air flows underneath the bottom of the brisket. Since the smokestack is here, the firebox is here, it flows under. So it results in a better finish on the bark, on the fat, as well as the bark on the meat. Now, the downside of that is you got your meat on the grate, so the finish of the meat is marred. So some pitmasters like to cook it basically up first, so that the hot air will set the Maillard reaction or set the crust on the facing side of the brisket, the meat side of the brisket. And after a few hours, they'll do the flip. So that's another 3-hour argument in Jerry Springer fist fight. There's going to be a lot of testing that has to be done to see which is optimum. I suspect it depends on your pit. So depending on your pit characteristics, you have to experiment on your pit to see if cooking in one position, fat up or fat down, the entire brisket cook works best for your pit or not. And then once you get done with that, you can try to experiment what I call a hybrid. I mean, some stage of it, you cook it fat up, some stage you cook it fat down. So that's why barbecue is not easy. There are thousands of different variations and combinations. And I can tell you, the more I learn about cooking barbecue, the more I realize how little I know. And it's a lifelong journey of basically, search of perfection. So Tim asking me, where's the best place on a pellet grill? I can tell you on my smoke fire, right? The smoke fire is a fantastic pit. You've seen me cook on it many times. You've seen the results I get. You see the smoke ring, absolutely competition grade. Now, on my smoke fire, it doesn't really cook well if my brisket is on the extreme right-hand side. Because for some reason, right, even though the burn pot is in the middle, the way the burn pot works is it always burns hotter on the right-hand side of the pit. And I don't know why, right? So I know my sweet spot, right? It's about 40% from the left edge, from the right edge of the pit. So if I'm standing right, my pit's in front of me right now, right? My pit is here. I will put the brisket onto a little bit to the kind of like left of center line. Is that what I said? Left of center line. Kind of make sense? Now, because the pit is hotter on right of the center line on my smoke fire, I like to start my brisket on the right of my center line. Once I get a little bit of bark, then when it reaches the stage where it's ramping up nicely, I move the brisket to the left of center line. And that's how I get the results I get on my briskets on my YouTube videos. Now, a lot of times I'm cooking so many briskets in it, I don't have a choice. So in that case, what I try to do is I try to rotate it when I'm not too lazy. So sometimes I stuff 6 briskets in my smoke fire for one of the episodes you have seen on my channel. So I try to do what I call the brisket shuffle. I kind of like shuffle the brisket back and forth when I'm not too lazy, all right? But the idea is that the brisket tends to cook in its sweet spot. The sweet spot in every pit differs. So you've seen Winnie's video, even on a 500 gallon, she has a sweet spot around kind of the middle to the right. That's where her sweet spot is. And that's something you know, after you cook 1,000 briskets in your pit, trust me, you can cook with one eye and one arm, you'll be fine. So don't stress so much about that. Now, GMG is much more even. The GMG has its own characteristics. It tends to be hot on the right-hand side where the what do you call the drip tray kind of slides towards the end and where the bucket is. So it tends to be hot onto the right-hand side, but not very much. The temperature variation on the GMG is a lot better than the smoke fire, but the smoke ring on the smoke fire is unbeatable. I on any given day, if I want to optimize on smoke ring, I'll cook on the smoke fire and red versus the GMG, but both pits are good. So don't get me wrong, at the end of the day, it's your preference and it's your style of cooking that truly matters. Some people don't care about the smoke ring, and that's fine. Flavor-wise, they're equivalent, so it depends on the pellets. If you've used good pellets I like GMG Gold Blend. They're fine. Many good brands out there. You can go to Lowe's and buy the local Lowe's brand. That's also fine. Yeah? Okay, so that's talking about the wrong position in pit. Facing the heat and rotation is important. Like you saw Winnie cook her briskets. She points the point towards the fire first because that's where the heat's coming from. So if the fire is here, she points the point of the brisket towards this side. So the hot air flows over the point. Sometimes they put a piece of foil on the edge to stop it from burning. Some people, they put a log to stop it from burning. Some people, they put a water pan. That's a whole bunch of tricks involved. And then some people tune their pits. They put a metal sheet underneath the pit. They put metal blocks underneath the pit to tune the pit so that it gets an even cook. So I've been working with Winnie, trying to teach her how to kind of tune her pit. Pit tuning is another TED Talk on its own, how to tune a pit. I was privileged to spend some time with David Close. For those of you who do not know who David Close is, he's the preeminent pit maker in the world, recognized by many as one of the finest pit makers. If you think about a person who makes a Rolex watch, he is the Rolex watch maker of pits. So if you look at my channel, go check out David Close's video about his operation in Houston, where he builds some of the world's craziest pits. He has a tremendous knowledge about pit design, pit thermodynamics, pit tuning, and how to cook great food on an offset smoker. So go check that one out. Now, let's talk about the next thing, number 16. Number 16 is the wrong spritz. Obviously, there's many products you can spray on your brisket. You notice I just use water almost all the time. A popular one is using half water and half apple cider vinegar, or half water and half white vinegar. You also have people who spray with MSG water, soy sauce and water, beer concoctions, different types of liquids they make up. So the spritz can sometimes be overdone. And the spritz primarily is divided into two categories. One is what I call the whether it contains oil or no oil. Now, there's going to be a big debate, and testing needs to be done as to whether when you spritz, should you use a product that contains oil? Like Tootsie, I met Tootsie yesterday. I tasted Tootsie's mop in there. She actually has a special mop she makes, which is primarily just vinegar and lots of butter. So you've seen my recipes where I did homage to Tootsie and I made her mop. So the mop is something that's very special. So just do whatever mop you want. Water works fine. And if you want to add a bit of oil, you can do a couple of things. You saw my test. I did beef tallow. I did pork fat, bacon fat. I did Wagyu fat, and I did clarified butter. So you can go watch the videos to see what my conclusions are on the different kinds of mops you can use on your meat, whether they are oil-based or they are liquid-based. The liquid-based includes things like, soy sauce that's salty, the tangy ones with vinegar, rice wine vinegar, balsamic vinegar. You can braise with Coca-Cola, 7-Up, ginger ale. Man, knock yourself out. That's just a lot of different ideas there. I like simple, so I've been using water. I've been using parquet, and I can't believe it's not butter. Won many awards on that simple method. So go try whatever spritz method that you like. Okay, number 17, very important. Okay, this is, let me pause here. Okay, I told you guys that the key to cooking brisket is having flavor on the surface of the meat. If you cook a piece of brisket in the pit with no salt, no seasoning, you will form a bark on it. The bark is caused by the non-enzymatic pyrolysis of amino acid, aka the Maillard reaction, aka the bark. Harry taught you bark equals flavor, no bark, no flavor. That's pretty much as simple as it is. So the bark creates thousands of new flavor compounds on the surface of the meat. If you do not know how to create the compounds on the surface of the meat, your meat will have no flavor. You can create bark with actually no seasoning. You can do that, but because the meat is already salty. Don't take my word for it. Go watch my video on how to cook the pork butt. Completely naked, no seasoning, and then you'll be amazed at how good that pork butt tastes because it's already salty, because protein has salt. You know, right? Your body has salt. That's why you survive. If you don't have enough salt, you die. So that salt is already in your protein. Now, barking is very important because establishing the Maillard reaction and the non-enzymatic pyrolysis of amino acid will result in flavor. You want to create thousands of new flavor compounds, but at the same time, you don't want to overdo it. The number one mistake I've seen teaching 300 classes around the world for the past 12 years is number one mistake is too much smoke. Number two, meat dries out. So really, once you establish bark, you have to change cooking methods from cooking it in a dry heat into a moist environment, aka braising. Braising is cooking meat with a little bit of liquid in a covered container. In this case, the covered container can be foil. The covered container can be a boat. The covered container can be a butcher wrap. And if you want to get more exotic, you can wrap in bacon, you can wrap in pork belly, you can wrap in banana leaves, you can wrap bamboo leaves, you can wrap in tea leaves, whatever you want. I was in Hawaii and my buddy and my student, Jake's barbecue in Hawaii, I bumped into him. You see the video soon. He wrapped his brisket in tea leaves, which is the leaves that you see in Hawaii, those leaves that you have the loco moco in, and the kalua pig. He wraps it in less leaves because he lends a very local island flavor and texture to his brisket. So there you go. No shortage of ideas on how to wrap meat. Now, the bark is important because once you establish the bark, and I taught you guys, remember this test? Harry's scratch test. You take your fingernail, you gently touch the meat. If the rub doesn't fall off, rub has set. So you want to make sure that you cook your meat until the bark has completely set on your brisket before you proceed to wrap. Because if you wrap your brisket prematurely, that rub will fall off. The Maillard reaction is not established. You won't get thousands of new flavor compounds on your meat. You have no flavor. So you're going to send me those, questions and say, how come my brisket has no flavor? What I'm going to say, hey, you didn't pay attention. You did not cook the brisket until the bark set. Now, conversely, you can also set too much bark. So you leave your brisket in there until it gets barked up, and then you let it bark up. You let it bark up until the damn thing becomes completely kind of over crusted. By that time, you have already committed two cardinal sins. Number one, you dried out your brisket. Number two, you've already imparted too much smoke on your brisket. So rule of thumb, very important. Establish the bark. Use the most powerful tools you have in your toolkit. Your hands, your eyes, and your brain. Watch your meats, do the scratch test. When it reaches the point where it has set, please remove it, change cooking technique, move to the Texas crutch, Texas boat, Texas butcher paper wrap, and foil wrap, whatever you want, but change cooking techniques, okay?
Harry,
All right,
what's the
last one.
window of time that you give before you start checking for bark? Usually like 3 hours? Is that like really it? Because you don't want to keep touching the bark, right?
It depends on your pit. It depends on your rub, depends on the ambient temperature, depends on your cooking style, depends on where you have it in your pit. So there's a lot of factors that I covered previously that apply to how fast your meat barks. That's why I admonish all of you again and again and again. I've been repeating myself like a broken record for 12 years online. Lock your watch, lock your thermometer in the drawer before you start. Take a leap of faith with me and follow my technique. And I can tell you, I trained many, many dozens of grand champions. Some of them have gone to Jack Daniels, American Royal, and so on. If you cook with my technique, lock your watch and drawer, lock your watch and thermopen in the drawer before you start. Why? Because you're not tempted to look at internal temperature. You're not tempted to look at time. And you will be so much more consistent and happy that you cook barbecue with just complete feel, complete understanding of the science of cooking barbecue, right? Just simple. Cook until crust sets, wrap, pull when bamboo skewer tender. It's as simple as I can distill it. And I taught enough students to know that everyone out there can understand 3 steps. Don't look at your internal temperature. So when you send me a question, right, and you say, I did this at certain time and certain temperature and blah, blah, I will immediately stop reading that email. I will send a note back. If you want to follow my school, you want to be my Padawan, and may the barbecue force be with you, Obi-Wan Harry will guide you. All you need to do is lock your watch and your thermopen away before you start. That way you get away from all this thing about the stall, evaporative cooling, and all this kind of crap that really is useful, but not helpful to get a championship result. Just follow my simple method. Don't worry about the temperature and time. That way, when your crust is perfect, you wrap. That's it. Whether it happens in 1 hour, it happens in 12 hours, it doesn't really matter. I've taught you the technique on how to visually verify that you are at the right stage. And that depends on many, many factors, which you don't really need to worry about. Just cook it until crust sets. Sound fair? Okay, good. All right. So last one is wrong wrap. Okay, wrong wrap is something of a subjective matter. Some people don't wrap. Some people wrap in foil. Some people wrap butcher paper. So I always tell people, knock yourself out. You see me do the test recently on my channel, and you guys saw the video. I did the full paper wrap with tallow. Then I did the naked Texas boat. I did the wrapped Texas boat. Then I did the wrapped Texas crutch or the foil. Knock yourself out. Try it your way. See which wrap method you like. A lot of people like the butcher paper wrap, which is good for backyard catering because it's easy. I'm a competitor, so I do a foil wrap with other products. You've seen my competition videos. I actually show you the video of exactly what I did. It's a master class of how Harry won first place in the Kansas City BBQ Society Team of the Year, what you call Ranchers Reserve Brisket Cup. So I show you the exact recipe. That's what I do, because for competition cooking, I'm out to pleasure 24 strangers who only take one bite of my meat. So the meat that I cook for the strangers is not meant for eating in a backyard setting. It's meant to take home a $10,000 check. So the technique I showed you is optimized to win a prize in a double blind judging contest. It's not meant to feed family and friends. So when you feed family and friends, the flavor profile is different, because on that competition brisket, I have to wow them with one bite, and I'm up against 100 teams. So it's a completely different proposition. I show you exactly how I do that. So I showed you also how to adapt that competition technique over onto the backyard and side, where you do catering and restaurants and friends and family cooking. You can actually basically, create the right kind of result that will match will pleasure your audience. And that's really what it's all about. So people look at my videos and say that it's too elaborate. Well, it's elaborate for a purpose, and I can simplify, and you can simplify it to match your own needs. Okay. Now, let's move on to the last few items here and conclude here. Run a little bit over. I was trying to hold it to 1 hour. Wrong hold and residual cooking. Okay, so after you cook the brisket, right? Remember that the brisket will continue to cook. So if you take the brisket off your pit and you kind of put it into a cooler right away, the brisket will go through a process called residual cooking. So the temperature where it's perfectly tender, it will make it even more tender. Sometimes that is by design, because some people like to pull the brisket a little bit underdone and let it finish cooking in its own heat pouch, whether the heat pouch is a packet of paper or a packet of foil. So that's something that people make a mistake of. I always tell my students, right, after the meat is perfect, cook it until it's perfect with the bamboo skewer. And remember, you need 2 bamboo skewers. So a lot of people give me grief and say, why am I sticking peanut butter flavor bamboo skewer into my brisket? Duh, you're supposed to use 2 skewers. Sometimes I have to explain everything in excruciating detail, because it didn't occur to people that you should have one bamboo skewer in a jar of cold, skippy peanut butter and another one in your brisket, so you don't cross and contaminate the 2. But people take me literally for my word, and they complain that why does their brisket taste of peanut butter? So there you go. So the holding is important, because you want to cut open the foil pouch, or you cut open the paper pouch, let it vent. And this is the time when your thermopan comes in handy. So take that thermopan out of the lock drawer and then check your temperature about an hour later. Once the brisket has dropped below 170 degrees Fahrenheit, it's safe to put away the brisket. Beyond that, you face the risk of residual cooking if you are not using the carryover to finish your cook. Some people like to finish their briskets earlier for food service. Sometimes you want to save money. You don't want to run your pit for that long or run your oven for that long. You pull it out, when it's just still a little bit hard, but then you put it away, wrapped up in a foil, you pile all of it in a big bucket, and then the thing kind of self-cooks itself, so to save some money. But short of that type of an approach, pull when the probe is perfect, cut open the paper or foil, open it up gently, let it vent, wait until the temperature is down to 170, and then go ahead and put it away in the warmer or a warming oven or in the igloo, okay? So that's the 19. Okay, moving on. Last one, super easy. Wrong slicing and presentation. Obviously, a packer has 2 muscles: the pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, point in the flat, moist and lean, fatty. And when you cut it, right, make sure that you cut the briskets 90 degrees against the grain. So on a brisket this size, let me see if I can illustrate this way here. If this is the brisket, right, and the point is up here, on top here. So what you do is you basically cut the point this way, like that, this way, and you cut the flat this way. So you've seen me do cuts on my channel. I don't really go to a lot of trouble slicing it perfectly, because all the brisket needs to be put into 28-ounce prep containers to be given away. So I just cut a brisket accordingly. But if you are running a restaurant, you're serving your family and friends, you want to cut the brisket 90 degrees against the grain. That's why the block trim works really well for restaurant, because when you trim it into a block, right, when you slice it, the slices will fit nicely onto a plate. And then you cut the point muscle 90 degrees against it. So you cut your brisket this way like this, and you cut your brisket on top this way. So the point is here, you cut it this way. So that way you can get a slice of the point muscle or the fatty or the moist, and then that nicely juxtaposes itself against the flat mussel slice. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the slicing and presentation. If you guys are interested in presentations for competition, that's another 20-minute tech talk just to talk about brisket presentation in a KCBS box, PNWBA box, or IBCA box. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because I want to run over. I have got a flight to catch also. So let me pause and see if I can answer any questions. So I hope you guys found this kind of sessions helpful. I can do more of these kinds of deep dives, but I'm not sure how many people are as nerdy as I am. But if you are, just let me know. I'm more than happy to share knowledge with you. A lot of times when my videos come out, they are kind of like bubble gum videos in the sense that I just touch the surface. I never have a chance to go deep down, because who wants to watch a 1 hour video of me talking? That's absolutely boring. I'm bored myself, listening to myself. So I appreciate you guys holding on there. My goal is to teach you how to spread barbecue love, right? So that you can spread more love in this world. And you guys, can tell me what the honest truth. You like deep dives, you don't like deep dives, you want to learn everything there is to learn, or you just want to learn the basics. Harry, forget about all that malarkey. Just tell me the 3 things I need to know, and I'm fine. And I'm okay with that, because I'm here for you. I love you guys, and I want really you guys to take your barbecue to the next level. I will never be done learning, because I'm a lifelong student. So I know that barbecue is a journey, because the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And I just love learning and experimenting, because I never believe, all right? I want to know. The only way to know is to do. So the bottom line is that when I do, I share it with you. I think you guys like that. That's why you help me crowdfund my channel. I spent in excess of, I think, $2,500 already just buying briskets alone, not counting my time, cooking, because I'm obsessively compulsive and I want to find the answers. And once I find the answers, I let you guys know the answers up front. So I help you guys along in your journey, because I want to give my love to you. I want you to experience my love, just like I experienced Tootsie's love yesterday. It's real. You can actually feel it. It's an experience, and it's a priceless experience. I want to give that some similar love to you out there, even though you're on a Zoom session with me. And I want you to take that love and give it to the world, because the world needs more kindness, respect, patience, and good barbecue. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna go sign off.